concerned. He's left with but one ship, and that ship is rowing now too. And it comes finally to the island or the peninsula of the wonderful nymph Calypso. Now this is the first of the three nymphs that he's going to meet. She is the nymph of lust and this kind of physical animal sensuality, and she converts men into swine. Well, Odysseus, not knowing where they were, sends a couple of his men ashore, and the goddess, the nymph Calypso, Circe of the braided locks, who is weaving a tapestry, turns them into swine. The god Hermes, guardian and guide to souls, of souls to the immortal life, comes to Odysseus and he says, you are in trouble here, and I'm going to give you something that will protect you. Just like the feather that was given to the boys, he gives a weed, a piece of a plant called moly to Odysseus, and he says, now you keep this with you and it will protect you against her magic, and when she begins to approach you, draw your dagger and threaten her. And she will then submit, she will invite you to her bed, go. And she will then transform your men back into men again and give you directions for the rest of your journey. Here we have Odysseus arriving, and here are his poor men turned into pigs, and they say, look what's happened to us. Here is Circe in terror of the dirk or dagger that he has drawn. And this figure, I think, is a beauty. Here you have the woman's magic and the male magic in conflict. Now has met up with a woman whom he can't just push around. This is his first experience of the female who has to be met face to face, not conquered so that he's on top, but face to face. And this is the problem he has to learn in this story, that the real masculine, manly character is not that of possession of woman and conquest of woman, but one of matching in discourse and in relationship in an appropriate way the power of the feminine principle. Well, what she does is now introduce him to the voyage to the underworld. She is now in the role of Spider-Woman in the last story. She tells him what the dangers are that he's going to have to face and how to go to the underworld to learn something about his true destiny and character. The first, he's down now in the underworld, and she has told him he has to make sacrifices of a certain kind, and with this he brings about the coming toward him of all of the spirits down there. Now they are twittering ghosts for the most part. The first person whom he meets and recognizes is one of his own men, Alpanor, who has just recently died, and Odysseus here meets him. But the most important encounter, and the encounter with the only figure who really is a three-dimensional figure down here, all the others are twittering shades, is with the great sage Tiresias. Now this is not Tiresias, but it is a representation of a philosopher. It's a Hellenistic or Alexandrian work showing a Greek philosopher, and it seems to me to represent the quality of this figure, Tiresias. The story briefly of Tiresias is that he was once out in the forest wandering, and he saw two great serpents copulating, and he placed his staff between the two and was himself turned into a woman. And he lived as a woman for 8 years. And after that time, he was in the forest again, placed his staff between two copulating serpents who he came upon, and he was turned back into a man. So here was one who had been a woman in part of his life and a man in another part of his life, and so represented the androgyne, or the union of the pairs of opposites. And this is the great revelation that Odysseus was to receive here, that the male and female are equals of opposites, so to say. Now the curious thing that happened with Tiresias after that curious adventure was, after his death and he was in the Olympia with the gods, there was an argument going on between Zeus and Hera, the great king of the gods, and his spouse, as to who enjoyed sexual intercourse the more, the male or the female. Well, they said, we're each on one side of this thing. Who can tell? Oh, said somebody, how about sending for Tiresias? So they sent for Tiresias and asked Tiresias. Well, Tiresias answers, well, the woman. Well, for some reason or other, Hera took this very badly and struck him blind. And Zeus, in, thanks, gave him the opposite faculty, namely of prophetic vision. When your eyes are closed to the outside forms of the world, you become aware of the inward dynamics of the world, and so it was with Tiresias. So he became a great prophet. But the point of him in this particular adventure of Odysseus is that he represents the kind of wisdom and life knowledge that comes from a recognition of the identity in two aspects of the one life as male and female. So with this message, he goes back to Circe. And again, she plays the role of Spider-Woman and tells him of his next adventure, that he may go now to the island of the sun, her father, just as our boys went to the sun for their power. But again, she tells him what the dangers are, and one of the dangers is to be the clashing rocks. Well, he need not go through that. He may go through two other dangers, and they are, first, the danger of the sirens. These spirits who sing the song of the universe and distract the man from his voyage and its direction, and then lure him onto the rocks. Odysseus did not want to be lured onto the rocks, neither did he want to miss the song of the sirens. And so he had wax put into the ears of his men, and he had, so that they would row past that song. He had himself lashed to the mast without wax in his ears, and hearing the song of the sirens, he finally went past them. You might say he had it both ways. He went between the pair of opposites. His next adventure was to go between a rock on which there was this fantastic figure, Scylla, a woman, the lower part of whose body was a kennel of barking dogs that consumed sailors wrecked on the shore. And on the opposite side to her was the great whirlpool of Charybdis. And Odysseus was to sail between these two opposites, the rock and the whirlpool. Later, Hellenistic interpretation of this symbol interpreted the rock as representing the rock of logic or reason, and the whirlpool as the whirlpool of emotion and mystical madness, and we must go between. Just as in the first talk I spoke of the problem of uniting the worlds of the Olympian Apollo and the Dionysian Dionysos, so here we must unite or go between the two. Well, in this way, he finally does come to the land of the sun, her father. He himself, you will remember, had identified himself with the ram, which was the vehicle of the sun, and so now he comes, as it were, to his own inward light. This problem of identification with the transcendent light is that of the yogi in India, the one who, through his yoga, has released himself from all the bondage of the lunar world, the world of the weaving and unweaving moon, and gone to the pure, unadulterated light of the sun. Now, if Odysseus had been an Oriental yogi, he might very well have stayed on the island of the sun. There was a taboo there, namely that you should not kill and eat the oxen of the sun. A perfectly appropriate taboo for this place or this mythological area. Namely, if you are to identify yourself fully with the spirit of the sun, what do you want with earthly food, namely the food of oxen or meat of any kind? So Odysseus is determined not to kill the oxen of the sun. On the other hand, he goes to sleep. That's to say, his earthly character takes over, he loses his concentration, and his men kill the cattle of the sun. The revenge is a complete shipwreck, and the last boat is wrecked. Here's a very early ceramic piece from the 9th century representing the wreckage of a ship, and I present it here to represent this situation. All of his men are killed, and Odysseus is the only survivor. And he grabs a piece of the wreckage and now is torn on the current right back swiftly over the course that he has already traveled. This, again, is a standard motif in spiritual experience. Namely, you bring yourself to a great tension through asceticism and austerities, and then you break it. I mean, some little distraction or something can break it. And all of the repressed emotions and desires that were kept down now come soaring back, and you're ripped right back. It's an old story in the lives of yogis, how such a ripping back can take place. Well, so that's what happened with Odysseus. He had reached the term of his journey, so to say, and is now on the way back. The goal of his life, the goal of his story, is not to remove him from the world, but to bring him back in proper relationship to a life in the world as a decent husband.